Mirror the Map. Mystery novels reflect on identity, murder, and place. We have three great ladies here. So while they're speaking, there'll be time for questions at the end if you want to ask anything. Can you hear me?
It's kind of hard back there with the noise.
Did you give the mic?
Downstairs.
Okay, our first writer is Leslie Rudowitz. She blends her passion for food, the mysterious, and the Northwest in two lighthearted series, the Seattle Spice Shop Mysteries and the Food Lovers Village Mysteries, set in Northwest Montana. Death Al Dente won the 2013 Agatha Award for Best First Novel. Her most recent book is Butter Off Dead. Also a lawyer, her guide for writers, books, crooks, and counselors won the 2011 Agatha Award for Best Nonfiction, making her the first author to win Agatha Awards for both fiction and nonfiction. Leslie's short stories have been published in Ellery Queen, Alfred Hitchcock, and elsewhere, and recognized in Best American Mystery Stories of 2009. She is vice president of Sisters in Crime. A native Montanan, she lives outside Big Fork with her husband, Don Beans, a musician and doctor of natural medicine, and their Burmese cat, a book cover model and avid birdwatcher. Christine Carbo, who I'm standing in front of, she grew up in Florida until she moved to Montana when she was 12. After earning a pilot's license, pursuing various adventures in Norway, and a brief stint as a flight attendant, she got an MA in English and taught writing, linguistics, and literature courses at a community college. She still teaches in a vastly different realm as the owner of a Pilates studio in Montana. Her first suspense novel, The Wild Inside, came out in June of 2015 from the Tria Books, Simon & Schuster, and her second will be out in May of 2016. And our last writer is Sarah Layden. She's the winner of the Allen and Narelle Gallison Prize for Fiction and an AWP Intro Award. Trip Through Your Wires is her first novel. Her short fiction can be found in Boston Review, Stone Canoe, Blackbird, Artful Dodge, the Evansville Review, Booth, Pank, the Anthology, Sudden Flash Youth, and elsewhere. A two-time Society Professional Journalist Award winner, her recent essays, interviews, and articles have appeared in Ladies' Home Journal, The Writer's Chronicle, Nouveau, and The Humanist. She teaches writing at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, and the Indiana Writers Center.
So what we thought we would do, it's hard to tell from here, but is this working? Okay. What we thought we would do is mix the format up a little bit. Instead of starting out with a reading, we thought we would start out by telling you about our books and then ask each other some questions, mix a little reading in with that, and leave time for questions from all of you. Hopefully we can make all that work. Why don't we do reverse alphabetical order, and since Sarah just got off an airplane, we'll welcome her to Montana by letting her tell us about Trip Through Your Wires.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thanks to, is it Gavin who gave me the word button? Because I haven't even checked in yet. But I'm very excited to be here, and I'm grateful to my fellow panelists for letting me kind of crash the Montana party. And my novel takes place in two different landscapes. It takes place partially in Indianapolis in the present day of 2003, and then partially in Guanajuato, Mexico, in the central mountain region of Mexico in the mid-90s. And there, my character, Carrie Halpern, she experiences the sudden murder of her boyfriend, her American boyfriend, while she's in Mexico. Can't cope with the situation, is sent back to Indianapolis, and 7 years later there's finally a break in the murder case where she's forced to revisit in memory those wires of Trip Through Your Wires. Revisit in memory everything that happened and understand that she knew more than she thought she did about everything that happened. And so it alternates between past and present, the very flat landscape of Indianapolis, and then the very mountainous, and there's a valley where Guanajuato exists in Mexico. So these very filled with contrast places, and also the contrast of the past and the present. So I think that we're all going to talk a little bit about that, about how memory shapes our work and how landscape shapes our work, along with thinking about the sorts of things like when people ask us, oh, is this you? what sort of mirror are you looking into as a writer when you are writing your characters? How do they mirror you, and in what ways, how do you see yourself in that mirror as well? Is that a good start, do you think? Okay.
So I'm Christine Carbo, and my book called The Wild Inside takes place in Glacier National Park, and my protagonist was also from Florida, and that's the mirror part in me. I've only got a little bit of mirror with my protagonist. He's a male, and he moved to Montana with his family when he was 14, and he was camping with his father one night in Glacier National Park and witnessed his father get attacked and killed by a grizzly bear. Yet he works for the Department of the Interior now and is called back in to investigate a pretty serious crime that takes place in Glacier. And he doesn't understand, I don't think he understands how that's going to impact him being back in that place in this kind of haunting setting. And Glacier is beautiful, but it's also it's for those of you who have spent time there, it can be very haunting as well, especially in the fall. And he really struggles with some post-traumatic stress type symptoms from not having properly dealt as a youngster with what he witnessed. So that's the landscape part of it, a little bit of the mirror, and as far as the writer, we'll get to that later, I guess.
So I'm Leslie Budowitz. As Alicia said, I write 2 lighthearted mystery series, which are sometimes called cozies. No graphic sex or violence, lots of graphic food. The Seattle Spice Shop mysteries are set in a fictional spice shop in the market, not the one we all know and love. I created a new one so I could kill people. But what I want to talk about today is my Montana series, the Food Lovers Village Mysteries. The 3rd one just came out. It is called Butter Off Dead. All the titles are, they obviously give you a clue, as the covers do too, that there is a lot of lightheartedness about these, but there is also a murder, and there's also a deep impact of the murder. I make a lot of jokes with a lot of name games and fun humor, but never about the death or the murder. I take all of that and the impact of it very seriously. My main character is a young woman named Erin Murphy who grew up in Jewel Bay, Montana, which those of you who live around here will recognize as primarily Big Fork, but with a little bit of Whitefish, a little Red Lodge, and a few other Montana towns we all know and love thrown in there. She has been away. When she was a senior in high school, her father was killed in a hit-and-run accident that has never been solved. And so she, like a lot of Montana kids, left for a number of years and then came back. That's a common Montana story. It was my story, and it was one I wanted to explore through the eyes of a younger woman in these books. She now runs a specialty local foods market in the heart of the village in her family's 100-year-old grocery building. And she runs it with her mother, which sets up an additional level of tension because she's running this business with her mother. They're 2 strong-willed women who have very different views of how the business ought to go. And she's come back to this town where she grew up. She thought she knew it, but darn it, wouldn't you know, it changed while she was away. And so she no longer knows everything. In this 3rd book in the series, there is a standalone mystery. Her good friend, who is her partner in helping set up the first annual Food Lovers Film Festival. I didn't mean to create tongue twisters for myself, but it works that way. Erin and Christine are organizing this Food Lovers Film Festival. And Christine, who is the former fiance and maybe the current girlfriend of Erin's older brother Nick, and this is not a spoiler, she's killed. And Erin has to take over the festival. She has to deal with investigate the murder of her friend. And wouldn't you know it, the 15-year-old death of her father comes back. And at the end of this 3rd book, we do finally discover what happened to Mr. Murphy. So there's both the arc of this story and the arc of the 3-book series. It does stand alone, but there is that overarching mystery as well. So I think all 3 of us, you can tell, explore a little bit of grief through our books, because Christine's Ted has this death of his father hanging over him. Sarah's Carrie has the unresolved murder of her boyfriend 7 years ago that has really come to a head right now, and Erin has that as well. So, Christine, do you want to talk a little bit about grief and how that plays a role in the story? Or have I thrown you a ring with that?
I could ask a question if you wanted about process. It's up to you if you
Yeah,
want to.
why don't you ask me a question?
Okay.
I like
We'll
it.
talk about grief some other time.
I'm really interested in process partially because I teach writing, and so I teach college students. I teach in the community in Indianapolis at the Indiana Writers Center, and so I think about process a lot. And I don't typically write in the genre of mystery. This is new for me. It was kind of surprising when people said to me, "Oh, you wrote a mystery," when I described to them what my book was about, and I was like, "Well, did I? Oh, well, yeah, okay, I guess I did." But I think that one thing that people who are experienced in the genre do is the plotting is so intricate, and there tends to be maybe more clear-cut resolution than, say, some literary fiction might have. And so these two quotes came to mind for me today, and I'm paraphrasing them a little bit here, but hopefully I'll get them mostly right. But I'm thinking about how you might map out your process. So there's a quote from E.L. Doctorow, and he said, "Writing is like driving at night in the fog. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way." I really like that thought. So when you're plotting things out, that maybe you don't need to know everything. You can just see as far as your headlights, and you can get to your destination that way. By contrast, and here's where I paraphrase, Toni Morrison, she says that she already knows the ending, and that's where she begins. And I wonder which is true for you. Does it change from book to book? Do you have a process that just works for you, and that's the way you do it? Help a novice out is what I'm really asking.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. So, I love that doctoral quote. I use it all the time because it is completely my process. I'm not a complete pantser where I sit down and have no idea and just go for it. I have to have a little bit of I need to know if I'm going to drive to California. And I can get to California with the headlights if I'm driving at night, but I got to know I'm going to California. And so that's the way it is. I know where I want to end up, and I know some general hotels that I want to sleep at maybe along the way. But I don't need to know everything that's going to go on into a scene, or which characters I'm going to find that I want to write about or that are going to get introduced. I don't even know all the characters that are going to be in the book. So some of it's by the seat of my pants, but a lot of it is knowing where I'm heading. And so that's a really apt metaphor for me. I'll leave the Toni Morrison one for you to talk about, or for you guys to talk about. But that one works really well for me. And yeah, Leslie?
So I love the Dr. O quote too, even though I don't completely use it. I also love the Toni Morrison quote, even though I don't completely use that one either. I start with the scenario, and because I'm writing series, I know my main characters. And so a lot of what I do in a book is guided by already knowing my setting and my main characters. I almost always know the ending before I start. And I almost always write an outline before I start. And I say almost because the book that is currently in progress is also known, and don't any of you tell my editor this, as the book that won't behave. In contrast to this one, which is known in our house as the book that wrote itself. I don't know how that happened. I really want to go back to doing it that way. That was a lot easier. So how I do the outline is, as I said, I know the scenario, I know the main characters, and I've been thinking about this story. I think about it for a couple of weeks or months, maybe in some cases, as I'm doing other things, and I make a lot of notes. And then I go back and I look at what really is going to work out of those notes, and I put them in some sort of chronological order. I have to know the ending, and I have to know what day of the week we start on and work towards that. And then, so when I end up with an outline, I've got each chapter, maybe 30 or so chapters, and there's a paragraph or so. I know where the setting, what setting it's at. I know what time and roughly what time of day it is and what day. It's not quite like Chris's spreadsheet that he told us about in the suspense class, or suspense panel, but sometimes I'll confess what it says is more stuff happens, or Aaron investigates. But I do know the major elements and of both the plot and the subplots. I years ago took a writing class from the great mystery writer Elizabeth George, who writes a psychological suspense series set in England, even though she is American. And she weaves together a lot of different characters, a lot of different point of view characters. And I noticed while I was reading her books before taking the class that in each of them, these subplots, and this it may not seem real revolutionary to any of you, but it sure did when I discovered it 15 years ago, the subplots all echoed or mirrored the main plot in some way. So in my books, I try to do something similar, where the subplots are a twist on the theme of the main plot. So I want to know what those are before I start the actual composition. Does that mean that I know it all? No, there are surprises. In Crime Rib, the second book, I changed killers. In Guilty as Cinnamon, which is the second Seattle book, and it will be out in December, 2 characters merged. I did not know that they were going to turn out to be the same person. That character, or that series has a lot to do with identity. And so a lot of fun things happen. Unfortunately, I dove in a little too quickly on the current book, and, well, I'm glad to be here with you today on vacation.
Am I answering the same? I'm answering my own question. Okay. I think, wow, for my process, it was probably a little bit of both. So I wrote many, many drafts of this novel. I kind of lost track. I could maybe go back into the computer and look at all the...
Don't.
I'm not going to. I don't want to know. I want to move forward. So the first several drafts, I would say, those were headlight drafts where I was just trying to see, what is the story? Where is it taking me? This novel started out in second person. It's no longer in second person. It's in third person. And the second person that I was addressing, I was referring to a man. And, you know, you do this. You come back from Mexico and you're in the worst pain of your life, and you this and this and this. And it became clear to me as I was writing that the you was a character who had died. I hope this doesn't sound very mystical, but it made me realize that I needed to switch the point of view. And then it became a third-person story, and it was told from the point of view, close third, of Carrie, the person who survived. And she's trying to find out, you know, what did happen to that you. And somebody pointed this out to me. I wasn't clever enough to think of it on my own, but they said, well, maybe because you've got your in the title, it's that remnant of beginning with second person. And I said, I'm stealing that. That's awesome. Except I just told you I didn't think of it, so I guess I'm not really stealing it. So that was true, but then the newest, where maybe the Toni Morrison quote comes in, the newest part of this book is the prologue. Like, the most recent thing I wrote was the prologue, and I was able to write it or rewrite it only after I had finished the entire book. Once I knew everything that had gone on, I was able to see everything, and I was able to think of a prologue that was really neither in Indianapolis or in Mexico, but it takes place kind of, again, in those wires of memory, and thinking about a point of view character that could understand more than the main character does, if that makes sense.
Okay. What you said, Sarah, about rewriting the prologue or writing it at the end makes perfect sense to me. It always seems to me that I spend more time rewriting the first chapter than anything else. Even if it doesn't change a whole lot, I'm always tinkering with the first chapter far more than with the end. Do you find that too, Christine? Or am I just totally weird?
No, yeah, the ending and the first chapter are the ones I think that I tinker with the most, yeah.
Well, so let me ask the question about the mirror. And that is the identity question. How much of the protagonist is the writer? And I think it's a natural temptation when we read a book to assume that the protagonist is or speaks for the writer herself. And we've got quite a different array of characters here. How does your own experience shape what your protagonists experience?
So I briefly mentioned it when I first started speaking that my character's male, and a lot of times people will just ask me that, well, why a male when you're female? And I don't know why. It, honestly, maybe just like your second person, it just came to me that way. I grew up with brothers, and I just don't get the sisterhood thing that much. I've never had, because I never had sisters, and so it just seemed like it came easy for me. And so I wrote from the male perspective, and my male moves to Montana from Florida when he's a youngster, just like I did. And so that write what you know part was definitely there for that. I have never experienced a grizzly mauling in my life. I've seen grizzlies and been frightened by them at times. And so the identification with the character, I think, comes more honestly through one of our other questions, which is about place. And for me, I love Glacier Park. I live in Whitefish. I love the Northwest in general. And I love the Bob Marshall, and I love the Whitefish Range and all the places around the Flathead Valley. And I love the Bitterroot, and I've spent I've hiked many miles in all those places, and especially in Glacier Park. And so what I identified with my character the most was that feeling of place, and what does it feel like to be in love with the wilderness and the wild, but also kind of haunted by it and scared by it. And I'm not particularly haunted or scared by it. I have a deep respect for it. And so when I go out walking my dog alone, back in the Whitefish Range, because I don't live far from it, I have 5 minutes and I'm there, and I walk the dog, and there's bear scat on the trail, and when I'm alone, it's like, oh, there's bear scat. And so it's a little frightening. I mean, it's not a big deal. I've seen it a million times, but it's kind of like, I assume if you live near the ocean, having a deep respect for the tides and having, respect for what can be out there. And so when I'm out in the woods, I definitely sense that one needs to be careful. One needs to keep their bear spray with them. I won't be referring to a Yellowstone incident that just happened, but you need to have your bear spray. If you're going to be in those places, and you need to understand what you're doing, where you are for the most part. And so, when I'm alone out there, I definitely feel like I'm not afraid of the woods by any means, and I'm not afraid of bears, because 9 times out of 10, they're more afraid of us and want to get away, just like a rattlesnake or any other animal. And so it's not that. It's the respect, and it's that identification with the respect, and the sense that I'm intrigued by this whole idea that when we're in the wild, that those of us anyway who live in Montana, and possibly you, Sarah, as well, that when we're out in the wild, there's a big contingency in the United States who never experiences it. I mean, they are in suburbs and concrete all the time, and just this huge disconnect from it. And I'm not putting that down by any means, and I'm not putting down the urban life in any way, shape, or form. It's just curious to me how people can, when we're in Montana, it's so a part of our lives. Yeah, we can disconnect from it too. We can be in our houses and drive around in our cars. But you see that sunset over the mountains, or you see that elk, or you see that coyote, or you see something, that fox, or something always is kind of pulling us to nature, I think, when we live here. I think so many of us want to live here because of that. There's that pull and that respect always to nature going on. And I don't think you always feel that if you live in a big city someplace. And so that I wanted to play with that dynamic quite a bit in the book as well. So I kind of diverted into the place thing there a little bit.
It would be a good time for you to read your section.
Sure.
Is that it?
So my character, I think I told you a little bit about him. He's called back into Glacier. He's a special agent for the Department of the Interior. It's called Series 1811 position. I did take a lot of liberties with it, and I've also taken liberties with the structure of the Park Police or there is no park police in Glacier National Park or Yellowstone, or there is park police, though, in the urban areas. And for the sake of conflict, I wanted to have a park police entity in Glacier Park. So in Glacier, the rangers are trained to handle all law enforcement issues. And then if there's a murder, as there was recently in Glacier, the FBI comes in. And but I actually have a guy from the Department of the Interior who's kind of my equivalent of the FBI who comes in. So in its first-person narrative, it's from his perspective. So it starts the fall of 1987. Paleness slipped into the dark sky and erased the stars as gracefully and peacefully as if nothing had happened. I struggled for breath, my chest shuddering violently each time I pulled in the bitter air. My teeth clattered noisily, and I couldn't feel my legs. I knew my jeans had been wet earlier, and they were frozen and hard as cement now that the fire had faded. I continued to stare in the direction he'd been dragged. All the noises had ceased except the sound of the gusting wind and the water lapping on the shore. But all the others, the screams, the grunts, the scuffling sound of the underbrush, even the small animals I'd heard scampering for cover had not resumed their activity. And the fire, its crackles and pops had stilled as it dried to a pile of white ashes with small embers. I couldn't remember starting it, couldn't remember feeding it and keeping it stoked. A gust of cold wind slapped the smoldering smoke into my face. I flinched and tried to stand, my numb legs not wanting to work. I clenched a long stick and stared at it as if my arm had morphed into an alien appendage. I quickly looked back to the opening in the brush that I'd been watching for several hours, even when the light was syrupy dark and I'd waited for amber eyes to come for me. The branches of bushes and small stunted spruce were broken, the skunkweed and bear grass flattened and smeared with a trail of blood. I squeezed my eyes shut and pictured my mom and my sisters at home in their warm beds. I ached for my mom, for her arms around me. Then I heard the screaming again in my head, right between my ears, expanding and pushing against my skull. I started to run, first stumbling, then full force. I ran and ran, faltering and tumbling over the hard, lumpy ground, over the edges of buried rocks and exposed roots on the well-maintained trail. I ran until it all went black. Fall 2010. If I could reveal one particular thing about my way of thinking, it would be this. I was a 14-year-old boy when that feral, panic-filled night ruined my ability to see the glass as half full. It's still hard to talk about, but in terms of self-definition, nothing comes close to that crucial 3-hour span of hellish time when the emotional freedom that comes from trusting the foundation one stands on would wither like a late fall leaf. Up until then, my mom, Mary Heisted, with her hazel eyes and dimples, a hospital pharmacist and a lover of self-help and pop psychology books, had always ridden me about being a positive thinker, telling me that I had a bad habit of seeing the glass as half empty, and that if I didn't learn to overcome it, it would have a very bad effect on my life. At the time, I had no idea what she was talking about, and later, I couldn't imagine what could be more negative than what ended up happening. Losing my dad and lying in the hospital for weeks like a heavy-backed sand, listening to the orderlies telling me how lucky I was to not have died. But that desolate late summer night all those years ago at Old Man Lake, the stuff of great sensationalism and freaky campfire stories isn't what's interesting to me now. What is notable is my knack for glimpsing the dark intersection of good and evil in people and seeing how it can be traced back to that fateful period. Because although this can be taken as positive thinking itself, and I'll admit traces of it creep in, my critical nature has made me fairly decent at what I do, which is working as a special agent. We call it Series 1811 for the Department of the Interior's National Park Service. Most people think of me as a glorified ranger because nobody ever imagines that crime occurs in the nation's parks, but it does. Drug trafficking, cultivation and trafficking, illegal game trading, drug manufacturing is what I'm going to say. Drug manufacturing, cultivation and trafficking, illegal game trading, theft, arson, archaeological vandalism, senseless violence, and of course homicide. Not to mention that the woods happen to be great places to dump bodies. The United States has 58 national parks with 80 million acres of unpopulated land. I and 2 other guys from the department are trained to undertake homicide investigations and are stationed in the western region, which means our offices are in Denver so that we can cover numerous sites: Yosemite, Yellowstone, the Grand Tetons, Bryce Canyon, Glacier, Joshua Tree, Mesa Verde, Death Valley, the Great Sand Dunes, the Olympic Peninsula. Mostly we work solo on cases, even homicides, since we have so much help from Park Police. Their Series 8803. Sometimes being assisted by Park Police is helpful, but sometimes it's a pain in the ass since we're not in the habit of working together, and we often clash in the way we go about the little things. It's the nuances, like knowing when to stay quiet, when to offer a small compliment, when to put on the unimpressed bored look, or to take the lead or follow. The other thing that can be traced to that night is my obsession with the grizzly, Ursus arctos horribilis. The grizzly was listed in 1975 as a threatened species in the lower 48 after being trapped and hunted to near extermination in the last century. One would think I'd be terrified of them, and here's the deal, I am. In fact, I became a policeman after college because even though I double majored in criminology and forestry, I felt this fairly significant panic at the base of my sternum at the thought of being alone in the woods. There's a catch for me, though. When I read or know about one of these creatures getting shot by a hunter, always accidentally, they claim, or getting euthanized for becoming too dependent on human garbage, I'm conflicted. I can't tell if I'm pleased, sad, or pissed off. It's as if each time one of these specimens with their scooped broad noses, cinnamon and silver-tipped coarse hair, eyes like amethysts, and the infamous hump protruding like a warning, is killed, another piece of my father dies with them. Or he is given a small slice of justice. Over the years, I've become more and more intrigued as if they've taken on some godly status. I've studied them from afar, reading everything I could get my hands on, mostly journals and published graduate theses on behavior, habitat use, and demography. After all, knowledge is power, and power helps alleviate fear. So one could say that for a detective/quasi-grizzly aficionado, I was heading into a perfect storm with this next case. And I could say this about the case as well. My torn recipe for positive thinking, with its already unpatchable shreds, would turn to jagged teeth, biting me even deeper than I ever thought possible. Sorry, it's kind of long.
And I was really struck listening to Christine read that, because I have read the whole book, how much of the rest of the book and the ending in particular is forecast in those first few pages. It's really, really fun to hear that go full circle. So, Sarah, why don't we turn the question about identity back to you? How much of Carrie is you?
I'll start by saying a lot of my friends and family, upon reading my novel, come to me and look sort of sheepish, and they're like, sometimes I didn't like her, as if it's this big confession, and I have to remind them, it's not me, it's okay. It's okay not to like a character. Unlikability is interesting sometimes and creates conflict. And there's a really great article, I think it was Roxane Gay, maybe on the rumpus.net, about unlikable women in literature. And it's okay, it's fine to write the unlikable female. But you know what, I have a soft spot for Carrie, and not because she's secretly me, but because, you know, we do share some similar experiences. I did travel to Mexico, not as a college student, but as a high school student, and only for a summer. I studied Spanish in a different city. And we visited Guanajuato for like a day trip or something like that. And I was so struck by it. If you've ever been there, it's just an incredibly beautiful city, very colorfully painted, the houses and buildings and things. And I knew that that was where I wanted to set it and where I wanted to put my characters. And so I wound up going back for a research trip. And I used to be a reporter, so I was really interested in kind of reporting what the setting was like and thinking about how my character might see it. The short section that I'm going to read is just about a page and a half, maybe. It takes place in a mummy museum. Have you ever heard of a mummy museum? It's one of the biggest tourist attractions in Guanajuato. I'm kind of slurring it. It's actually Guanajuato. But it's one of the biggest tourist attractions, and it's bodies that were dug up from a cemetery. When the families couldn't pay the cemetery tax, they were dug up, and they were really well preserved. They think because of the mineral properties of the area. They're not sure. Guanajuato is known for silver mining, or was. And so they put these bodies, these mummies, they call them, under glass. And people pay money to go to this museum and look at all of the mummies. And so Leslie mentioned earlier echoes, having echoes in your subplots. And so this moment in the Mummy Museum, Carrie and her boyfriend Ben are visiting the museum. along with Ben's best friend Mike. And the three of them have something of a triangle among them in a variety of ways. And we already know at this point in the book that Ben dies. And so I was thinking about echoes as well, and thinking about, what does it mean? What does it mean to be visiting this place with the, looking back on visiting this place with the knowledge of what does happen? And so thinking both literally and metaphorically about the mirror. Do you remember in grade school, or if any of your teachers in an elementary school, the bathroom mirrors were not really mirrors? They were just like sheet metal, and you could kind of see yourself in it, and maybe it's easier to clean and it doesn't break. Yeah, restroom mirrors, that's exactly, or rest stop, yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And so in the museum, Carrie actually looks at herself in one of those mirrors. You'll hear it in a moment. And that's kind of how I think about the way that I might be reflected in this book. I'm a blurry version of everything that's in this book. I'm Carrie and I'm not Carrie. I'm Bartolo, who is a Mexican man. It's filtered through my perception. And so all of those characters are something of me. And they're also not me at all. So I don't know if that's too cryptic, but I think it kind of helps just to think about it that way, for me at least. So this is on 206, if you want to reference it later. Okay. Carrie kissed Ben there among the corpses, then continued down the long hallway of the dead. Ben followed for once. A few yards away, Mike snapped a picture of one of the mummies. Look, he pointed, no glare. The glass case bore a small half-moon hole through which Mike aimed his lens. The male body wore old-fashioned woolen trousers and thick black overshoes, eye sockets dark and empty. You broke the glass? Carrie asked. Jesus, Mike. Mike shook his head, shaggy blonde hair falling in his eyes. Do you see broken glass? It was true. The brokenness had happened before. Ben whistled. I bet you could touch his leg if you reached, he said to Mike. A sinewy ankle like dirty rope exposed itself between the corpse's trouser cuff and shoe. 100 years earlier, those legs probably had walked the same cobblestone streets as the three of them. Ben and Mike dared one another. Touch the leg, they taunted. It's just an old man's old leg. The exchange heightened, and she could see the languid, unhurried enjoyment in both their faces. Mike raised an eyebrow, so Ben raised too. Ben scratched his nose, and Mike repeated the gesture. In the absence of glass, we are each other's mirrors. He looks like beef jerky, Ben said. Carrie pushed past and stood before the missing piece of glass. Here, she said, like clearing her throat. She reached through the jagged hole, careful not to scratch her wrist, taking over a dare no one offered her. Holy shit, Mike said. Her fingers grazed whatever was left of the man's tendon and bone, not rope or beef jerky or even human flesh. It felt like dirt, like dust, something that once carried weight but could float away at any minute. She pulled her hand back. Ben stared, disbelieving. Mike uttered a string of fucks, showing she'd impressed him. Who wants to hold my hand? She asked sweetly. They both refused, suddenly squeamish, insisted she go to the ladies' room and wash vigorously. Use hot water, they joked, trying to hide their seriousness. The bathroom, like many of the public facilities she'd encountered in Mexico, had no soap, paper towels, or even toilet paper. The water dribbled from the tap, lukewarm. She rinsed her hands and shook them like a wet dog shakes and smiled at herself in the waxy mirror above the sink, practically laughing out loud at what she'd done, at how they reacted. They'd all made light of the unnaturally posed corpses, the mummy's clothes and hair, but only she stepped forward to reach through the hole. Brave, bold Ben. That's how she'd seen him for months in Mexico and for years earlier in Indianapolis. But when her hand maneuvered through the broken glass, Ben's face clouded unmistakably with fear. That's what she would think of later. He was capable of fear, scared of death. It was the first time he'd showed her. she couldn't stop seeing.
So to talk about identity a little bit, I mentioned earlier that I had two protagonists, and that the lead character in the Food Lovers Village mysteries, Erin Murphy, does share my story in growing, in that she grew up in Montana and then left for 10 or 12 years and came back. I would say that of the two, Erin in this series and Pepper Reese in the Seattle Spice Shop mysteries, that Erin is closer to me. Probably because she is the first of the two that I created, and then when I started the second series with the idea of writing both series at the same time, one book in each series every year, I wanted to make Pepper different, and so I made choices that made her different. But there are aspects of her in me too, or of me and her. I loved what you said, Sarah, about some element of us in each of the characters. Even if we're not, even if you, for example, are not Carrie's mother, Gwen, with some of her peccadillos.
You know Gwen. Good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You understand that character. And so in many ways, I think what we're saying is that these characters are personal without being autobiographical.
That's a great way to put it.
So, and I stole it. I don't know who I stole it from. No, I read something like that, and it really stuck with me, and so I've just been thinking about that a lot. I didn't read it exactly put quite like that, or I would have remembered who wrote it and quoted them. But I think it is much of what we're doing as authors. Christine segued from identity into place. We got a lot of the place in the section that Sarah read. I'm going to read you a really short little section that I'm reading it mostly because I love it. We're halfway into the book. Erin is in Big Fork, Jewel Bay, excuse me. She has broken a glass that belongs to her mother, and her mother has reacted uncharacteristically. Her name is Francesca. She's very upset by this, and Erin can't quite figure out what is the importance of this glass. But she's on a mission. She goes to Ponderay, which is my version of Kalispell. I changed the names of any places where I might want to kill people. Missoula is safe.
For now.
For now, yeah. So she's on her way there to Ponderay to look for this broken glass. And one of the sub-themes, or to look for a replacement glass, I should say, one of the sub-themes in the book, one of the subplots is collections and obsessions and what that does to us. What would a person kill for? That doesn't come up in this little section, but it does relate very closely to what the broken glass is about. One clarification on a character you won't have heard of. I said I'd make a lot of jokes with names. There's a character named Jack Frost. Jack Frost aside, and Jack Frost is a rabid anti-wolf person, rabidly anti-wolf, and he drives a snowplow. Jack Frost aside, I sing the praises of snowplow drivers. I sing them in squalls and blizzards, whiteouts, and flurries. Sorry, the light up here isn't super great. Jack Frost aside, I sing the praises of snowplow drivers. I sing them in squalls and blizzards, whiteouts and flurries, in slip, slide, and slush. I sing them too in wet and powder, in blinding pellets, in soft snow drifting from the sky like petals from an apple tree. High above the road, the plow drivers sit in lumbering orange mastodons with chains on their tires and engines that could turn the earth on its axis. Mastodons with blades for tusks, capable of moving mountains, sand, and gravel in their bellies. Neither snow nor rain nor gloom of night can stop them, though they pause to refill the gas tank and coffee cup. They march across dale and thunder over hill, cleaning up the messes Mother Nature makes to remind us that she's in charge, not we human few who dare cut paths through the wilderness and pave paradise. I sing the praises of snowplow drivers, even as they hog the roads, ice and sand spitting out from under their massive wheels, brave men and women who keep the roads clear and all us idiots safe. Creeping the 22 miles into Pend Oreille behind a snowplow gave me plenty of time to think about Christine's house and someone's search for what? Had she been killed for this missing item that none of us, not even Nick, knew existed? Obviously, Iggy, oh, I'm sorry, I should have explained a few other characters. Obviously, Iggy, her inventory complete, was not a compulsive collector, unlike a stamp dealer with his lists or my mother's friend, the former DJ, who'd cataloged his thousands of albums and 45s on 3x5 cards. I passed a driveway marked by a row of birdhouses, each a different style and cover and color. By our collections you shall know us. If clothing counts, my 8 denim jackets. And my heart-shaped objects, rocks, shells, pins, cookie cutters. The entire collection fits on the bathroom windowsill where it brightens the morning. The latest edition, a pink agate heart Adam gave me at Christmas. But while I love them, and I wear my jackets often, they don't make my heart race, if you'll pardon the pun. If I come across one that catches my eye, great, but I've never spent an afternoon scouting for hearts or wandering consignment and thrift shops for the jacket to complete my life list, or whatever. I'd rather spend that time perfecting perfecting a scone or a stew. We all have our passions. So that was my I misread scone as scene because I'm so obsessed with the current scenes that will not behave. So why don't we turn it over to you and let you ask us questions? Fire away. Don't be shy. Yes, sir.
You're all fairly eloquent, efficient speakers. Do you write that way as well, or how long did it take any of you to write what you wrote?
So the gentleman is kindly complimenting us as eloquent speakers and asks if we write that way as well, and how long it took to write these books that we're talking about.
From when I started it as an MFA student at Purdue University to when it was published, it took 10 years. I did other things in between that too. It wasn't like 10 years of just sweating blood, but it took a while. That particular chapter that I wrote in a very feverish weekend, and that stayed pretty intact through all the drafts. But it was the exception, not the rule.
I wrote this book in a year, and then I revised it for about 4 months. So, and then it took another year to get an agent, and then it took another maybe 1.5 years for it to actually get out into the bookstores. Yeah. So, Leslie?
Nothing focuses the mind quite like a deadline. I don't know how long it was from start to finish because I wrote the outline several months before I wrote the book, but I wrote this book in 3 months.
Oh my gosh.
2 months to write the first draft and a month to revise it. And then it took about 9 months to get it back from my editor when I had 10 days to do line edits and copy edits combined. That's not the norm, but because of a combination of crises, that's what happened. And I just worked really hard on it feverishly for those 10 or 12 days to finish the edits. I actually think that of the 4 published mysteries, it's the best. So whatever Kool-Aid I was drinking, I want more of it. Yes, Chris.
Hey, question about mysteries in general. For me, like a satisfying mystery tends to have something some piece of information the reader doesn't know at the beginning, wants to know, and at the end they know, right? And the journey going along that, you get hints of some kind. The answer at the end comes out of nowhere. It's not satisfying. So my question is, how do you walk that line of letting the reader know just enough so that they are still surprised, but they're not too surprised? And in the revision process, do you ever find that you've gone too far? You've made it too easy to guess what's happening, or you've made it too difficult?
That's a good question.
Did you all hear his question, or should I try to repeat it? I think you all heard it. Want to try that?
Sure. Yeah, it's a really great question, and it is a problem. A challenge, I should say. It's a challenge. And a lot of readers feel that way, that they don't want to have something that was mentioned once maybe at the very beginning kind of come back at them, and they want to feel like there were enough hints along the way to figure it out. Yet some people are better than others at figuring out mysteries, and so I've had so many people say I had no idea, and then I've had several that have said, oh, I totally knew who did it. And, you know, and that's just, some people are better, and it's really hard as a writer to figure out where that fine line is, and that's why if you're a writer, you need readers before the book comes out. You need editors, and you need feedback. And they'll let you know, hopefully, and even that's subjective, depending on your readers. And so you do the best you can.
I agree, absolutely. Do you have anything to add to that? Maybe?
Well, what Christine said is the heart of it for me. You want your reader to get to the end saying, oh my gosh, I didn't see it coming and I should have. And it is one of the hardest things to do. It's why I do the outline that I do, why I can't just let it flow. But I've read hundreds of mysteries over the years, and so I rely on my instincts a lot to tell me where those places are, where something needs to slip out and where something needs to be held back. It is the biggest challenge, and I do worry about the reader who is too smart. The mystery readers are voracious, and some of them will read a mystery a week, and they will probably pick up on things that the more casual reader won't. And I have to write for both of them. And that's what keeps me up at night. It is also what keeps me going, because it's the most difficult thing, but it's also one of the most fun aspects of writing this kind of book.
So you talked a little bit about how you structure mysteries and how you hope nobody figures out the ending before it gets there. I was wondering about when you read mysteries, do you tend to be able to guess the ending? Because I never can. Never.
I usually don't guess it either. I did not guess the killer in Christine's book until just before. And I went, oh, I bet it is, oh really, I don't want it to be, and it was. So that was kind of fun. You start at a certain point of the book, casting around the cast of characters and thinking, well, she's ruled out this one and she's ruled out that one, and it can't be this one, could it? And you start figuring out who's left. It's sort of like if you've ever seen the TV show Castle, they always slip the killer in that first innocuous scene, and you forget. They don't do it always, but probably 75–80% of that show, the killer is right there in the first scene, and you just didn't ever anticipate it. But you have to be careful. You don't want to always be doing that, too. You've got to come up with different structures if you're writing a series, and that's another challenge. Want to comment?
Well, I think that also, depending on how character-driven the mystery is, that you can get some leeway. Readers are more forgiving, I think, if they're really fascinated with your characters or your main character or the problem or the dilemma that's going on, the internal stuff that's going on for your characters. And so if there's less of that, then you're relying really on the plot. And then the plot needs to be really fine-tuned. And I mean, it should always be fine-tuned, but it needs to be like really surprising then who the character is if it's all relying on plot. Or I shouldn't say all, because no story's all plot, but you know, some are more plot-driven, some are more character-driven. And I think you can, do you agree that you can get away a little bit more with maybe not having the perfect surprise if you've got that sense of, I just really want to know what's going on with these characters, you know, like what's going to happen? Because really all stories are that have mystery elements, like what's going to happen? What are these characters going to do to get out of this dilemma, to solve this problem, are they going to find their love? Are they going to repair their past? Are they going to, whatever, you know, you're always wondering what that solution is going to be. So the actual whodunit, I think, can be, I'm not saying be lazy as a writer, but you see, yeah.
That's why I think that the mystery is a really efficient way to deliver a story. Because mystery requires a pretty tight plot. It's got to make sense. It's got to hang together. But in the modern world, the mystery reader, along with every other reader, wants really strong character development. We don't know a whole lot about Miss Marple's love life, and we don't really know what drove Hercule Poirot into the war, and we don't know a lot about some of those characters from the Golden Age mystery, but you can't get away with that in the modern mystery. You have to have all your characters be fully rounded characters. And so the combination, I think, of that plot and the character demand, along with setting and language, makes the modern mystery, whether it's the literary version that Sarah's writing or one of the traditional varieties that Christine and I are doing, makes it a really terrific read.
I always feel extra smart when I figure something out before it happens. And that was true of Gone Girl and The Girl on the Train. I'm reading them and I was just like, I bet this is about to happen. And it's just very satisfying from a process point of view. But I don't think it's, once you get done with it, I don't think it's that satisfying as a reader or from a reader's point of view, because I won't reread those books, because I don't think there will be very much surprise for me. My sister and I were reading Gone Girl at the same time on vacation, and she was like, where are you? Where are you in the book? And she was a little bit ahead of me, and I said, I think this is about to happen. And she would just stamp her foot and be like, how did you know? Well, this is what I do. I want to try to find out. But I don't think that, and this isn't to put down Gone Girl or Girl on the Train, because I think they're both enjoyable books in their way. I think they're also very problematic books in their way, and that's a topic for another panel. But like I said, I don't know that I would want to reread them necessarily. And I wish I could remember where I read this quote, or again, to paraphrase, but somebody said that mysteries are not necessarily just about the whodunit. It's not about finding out, well, who was the murderer, and then you just wipe off your hands and go home. People read mysteries because they want to learn how to cope with the mysteries of their own lives. What are the mysteries that we carry inside us, and how can we better understand them? And that is really interesting to me too. And I think that's something that I tried to explore in my book as well. With Carrie, looking back and thinking, I should have known better. And sometimes I did know better, but I didn't do the right thing, or I didn't do anything about it. So that was something I wanted to explore.
Other questions? Yes.
When you wrote your first novel, the idea of a series of novels, does it come after the fact and you go, oh, hey, I can dredge that person back up and use them again? Or somewhere along in the first novel did you go, hey, this is not the end, I've got to write more about that person?
I think Christine's answer might be different than mine, and I don't think Carrie's or Sarah's is a series.
Nope.
I pitched mine as a series. I sold it to Berkeley, which is part of Penguin Random House, unwritten, based on a proposal, an outline, synopsis, and sample chapters. And so I knew from the start that it was going to be a 3-book series, and that's why, and there may be more in the series, I don't know. But I knew that there would be at least 3, and that's why I worked in that mystery of her father's death that ties all 3 books together. So you sort of piece out your character development as you go along.
So mine was a 2-book deal with Simon & Schuster, or Atria Books, which is a subsidiary of them. And I actually was fortunate, and I actually had 2 offers, one from HarperCollins, one for Simon & Schuster, which was like really thrilling for me at the time with my first novel. And so I was out for my sister-in-law's surprise 60th birthday and on the East Coast, and so I was able to go to New York, luckily, and meet with both editors. And when I was meeting with them, both of them told me that it would be a 2-book deal, and they said, so what's the second one? And it's going to be in Glacier Park, right? And I said, right. And what animal is it going to feature? Because you feature the grizzly in this one. What animal is it going to feature? Maybe the Wolverine. And from there, my plot grew for the second book. But I was pretty green at the time and was kind of winging it. And so, but I feel good about my second book, and it does have a little bit of, not to the same extent, but some information about the Wolverine. So.
So I lost our timekeeper, I thought, and here she is sitting in the right in the front row. Are we?
I think we're about
We're right.
I think we're there.
Okay. Do we have time for one more? I see somebody in the back. Or maybe it was just the cameraman standing up. Any more questions? Well, thank you so much. It's just been a delight to get to know Sarah, and Christine and I have known each other for years, and we welcome Sarah to Montana, and thanks all of you for coming out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was great. Yeah.